look at me. Wrong. Because with no power comes no responsibility.
So the one thing I'm curious about, because we're talking about the color and the black and white thing.
That last panel sucked, by the way. You guys are the good panel.
Oren, I did want to ask, how long was post-production and how was that compared to production?
When was production? Like what year? Post is long on a show like this. It takes place in the 30s in New York, in live action, and we shot it in LA in 2024, and it's black and white and color, so everybody's workload was doubled.
Yeah.
Really, everybody. And even in like composing, it affects. You have to thread the needle always in every single department. In sound, we're playing games with, we're not playing games, but experimenting with mono, because that's what the old noirs were. But it feels one way in the black and white and feels drastically different in the color. So post was a long, intensive process. It wasn't like, a little thing here, a little thing there. Everyone was working nonstop for over a year.
Yeah. But as well, like, how much of it was practical, just to give us an idea of like what this panel is building off of, I guess.
So much of it is practical. It's hard to explain because Hnedel did 3,250 VFX shots. Is that right?
Thanks for remembering.
But at the same time, all that is building off of a ton of things that are practical, and we tried to do things as practically as possible, and we had to do things as practically as possible because those 3,250 shots are very expensive. So everything from prep on through is trying to plan how to mitigate and limit the number of those shots and the scope of those shots, so that when you are doing those shots, they're efficient and they're gorgeous and they're beautiful and they look great. So you want to have as much practicality on there so actors can work and everybody can do their jobs and be in the space, but it's a combination.
Yeah. And thinking about, like, again, the color versus black and white, Jennifer, like, are you editing the versions of the two versions of one episode simultaneously? Is it pieces of each one kind of mixed throughout?
I cut in black and white exclusively for quite some time. And I was thinking about it the other day that I actually didn't see it in color. I didn't see any shots in color, I think, until the first time I went into a visual effects review. And we saw it, and I was so surprised because I thought, oh my gosh, the alcove has orange in it and blue, and I had never seen it before. I'd only seen it in black and white. So, and I felt that was really informative for editing and for style and for pacing and the whole vibe of noir. I loved it.
Yeah. So if that's the case, like Hnedel was kind of day one, you were maybe shifting it from black and white to color, or was it a similar situation of you started your work in black and white?
Our work was always in color and then cross-referencing in black and white.
Mm.
Black and white is a lot more forgiving in the VFX shots.
Correct.
There's just a lot of times where you're watching a scene and you're like, great, this is done. And then you go to color, you're like, what's happening out that window?
No, it's so interesting to hear. I mean, for everyone, were you primarily working in black and white or in color?
Yeah, for the mixes, we would mix in black and white. That was kind of our master. And then we would do, most of our playbacks in black and white, but we would do one in color just to make sure that everything we were doing would play properly with both versions. So, and we were kind of doing the inverse. We would cross-reference the color to make sure we weren't missing any sound effects or anything, because we might not have been able to see it on the black and white. So we were going back and forth as well.
And you found things. That just wasn't always the case that it would be fine.
Yeah.
Like initially when the first couple episodes we were doing a certain thing, and then in color, you just saw the difference. It was like, we can't do it. The filtering we were doing on that mono, it was too much.
Yeah. The noir, style that we were going for, it took us a little bit to figure out, the right balance, to where it would play smoothly on both. So that was, something that we had to work through. But once we figured it out, we were all really happy with where it was sitting.
Yeah. Does it factor into scoring as well, or is it just kind of like you guys' preference, black and white versus color?
Yeah, it definitely did. I think that I only looked at the color for a reference early on, and with scoring it, we scored, almost exclusively to the black and white, but the color was helpful to remember the importance of modernity. Like, obviously the show is very modern and so many aspects of it feel very modern, but remembering that this score needs to feel engaging when we're watching it in color, I think also just helped us remember that even in either option, the score had to be very modern and edgy, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, I think Kris is spot on there, and the black and white never made it feel old-fashioned for us. It always just reminded us of how singular and unique the tone for the show is, and it's, at least score-wise, it's never this homage to the noir, and it's never an homage to the superhero, but it's this combination that creates something that's really new and also has lots of crazy modern sounds like electric guitars and trash cans being bashed and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah. Something that I was just really struck by watching this show that involves sound, VFX, the music, etc. I wonder if it was like a real goal for you to kind of help the audience get into Ben's head, because we see dreams, we see flashbacks, we see different states of consciousness,
And we start the show with some voiceover too, which is a part of noir and a part of Spider-Man and comic books, but I don't think we wanted to overdo it. But it's always you want the audience to understand what he's thinking and get inside his head, and he's not always a man of so many words, so you use every tool that you have and then try to find the right balance, and that's just editing and testing and tweaking every single thing until, is it the score that will help us get in there? Is it a sound? I mean, with the Spidey sense, we played with there's so much work in getting the sounds right. It can be visual effects to, heighten, to put more vignetting, or do whatever you're going to do to just get locked in on Ben's, way of thinking, because, Nick Cage and Ben Reilly are so much of the show. The first episode, I think he's in almost every single scene. So, and for the most of the show, he's there. So you really want to get in his head. So everything you can do, you try to do.
Yeah. Nick and Matthew, there are some pretty classic Spider-Man sounds. And I'm wondering, is sort of the onus to incorporate like the thwips and things like that? Or was it like, what are we pulling from noir? Is it just this big mix of not quite as referential as much as we're building something new?
Well, I think Andy, our sound designer, our supervisor, can speak more on it, but we really wanted to, pay respect to the Spider-Man, but this was also our own story and our own show here that we wanted to create. So, Andy and Ethan and everybody went and made their own sounds, and we made our own world with respect of, the legacy of all the Spider-Man stuff before. So, you could speak more to it.
Yeah, no, the entire team really dove in on trying to be super unique because of the 1930s kind of noirness and live action. I had originally created the noir character for Spider-Verse, and so I kind of kept that theme going. But one of the elements I use for Spider-Verse is like a Tommy gun shot for his web shooter. But this is a natural kind of shoot, so we don't want to have that. We don't want to make it mechanical in any way. So the team kind of worked together on ideas of how we can kind of keep this in 1930s, but keep it cool. And an idea was kind of taking an old mag roll and poking out the core and hearing that little that comes out of the middle of it and recording that. It's analog film that we're recording, but we're using digital technology and putting it in the show. And then Ryan Collins, the mixer, kind of really tightened it up and gave it that Spider-Man uniqueness that we needed. Because it's the spider, and the spider sense too is the same thing where it's different. It's not the same as all the other spider senses you've ever heard. And this one in particular, Oren had talked to us early on about, yes, it's connected to the multiverse, but I want to hear it like a spider would hear it. And it feels it. It doesn't actually hear. Spiders hear through vibration. So the important part for us was hearing that vibration, feeling that vibration when it hits. And so the team, Will Digby, Ryan Collins, and I kind of came up with different elements. And Ryan kind of attacked the initial sucking in with the spider sense. And then we had that vibration. And then I really wanted to work on how we connect that to this, not just multiverse, but also Ben in his life. And Oren had specifically called out wanting to hear him kind of almost crying from birth to the bite to every element of that. And so you'll kind of hear it, and as you watch, what kind of sucks us out is the bite when he gets bitten later in the series that you'll see. So we had a lot of fun playing around with it.
Yeah. God, that's quite the scene that the audience is in store for. Nick, sort of sound-wise, are you focusing on the effects or more like the dialogue, or?
I was the
Sorry,
dialogue music mixer for the show, and then my partner Ryan Collins did the effects side. So,
and then Matthew, sort of what I was kind of curious about is in doing the research, it sounded like there was work that we don't often think about, especially this is such so focused on the visuals. And so what was the work in sort of making sure that like all this effort on the visual side doesn't compromise the sound landscape or the soundscape?
Well, I think it's just a matter of working with Darren to make it faithful for how it looks, because it's looked so good, and we're trying to make it sound so good, and give the post guys and the whole post team everything they need to give it the feel, you know. And it's because it's noir, it's gritty and it's raw, but I want to give them the full picture so they can take it the way they want to later. And that's what we were focused on the whole time, basically.
Yeah.
And you got involved too in like the early experimentation of trying to like figure out what the spider might sound like, or I mean, it was always all hands on deck. Like, we're inventing some things. Let's start inventing as early as we can and see what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah. And then Kris, you kind of alluded to this, but I'm wondering with the score, editing, visual effects, etc. What were kind of sort of like the modern tools and strategies that you were applying to something that was also supposed to be evocative of like classic cinema?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that Michael and I talked about in our first conversation was listening to as many of the iconic noir scores as possible, and then trying to forget all of it as much as we could, but just to have it ingrained in us, and obviously all the superhero music that is ingrained in us, and then just trusting our instincts. And it always starts with melody in my mind. Like, that was our first conversation with Oren. It was just about how important it was that these characters had strong themes that could track their trajectory and their arc over the course of the whole season, and also making sure that these themes are strong enough that they can be combined if, two characters are talking and their two themes are intertwined, and then they mention another character and that theme comes in. So it all started with the foundation of that traditional approach, but then painting it with like a bunch of synth sounds, and Michael mentioned unorthodox percussion, like trash can stuff, some prepared piano. There's like theremin in there. There's for Silvermane, there's like this penny whistle sound. For Silvermane, it was also interesting in my mind that you have villain characters that oftentimes the score is dark and low, and this villain already feels heavy. And the thing that's so great about Silvermane is that he whispers as he's killing people. And so to have something that was like high and suspenseful and quiet with these like lurking like synth things and reversed percussion things that just kind of come in and out just with the unexpected feeling that he kind of lords over everybody. But those are some things. What other elements do we have?
Oh man, there's so much. And I think one of the most inspiring conversations we had with Oren early on is we were talking about setting, and we walked into it thinking, okay, this is black and white. We're in 1930s New York. There's going to be heavy jazz element. What does New York mean to you? And we thought that was going to be a cakewalk. We know what this is going to sound like. And Oren hits us with this curveball, and he says, for me, New York is 90s punk rock. And I was like, oh, okay, we can really blend a completely different sensibility into this. And so that gave us permission to not only use electric guitars, but it just kind of gave this freedom to throw anything in. I mean, there are parts of the score where we're doing full-on marching band arrangements only to slow them down and pitch them down and then to bury them amidst, you know, a piano that's being hit with a hammer, which to us is like some nerdy homage to Chinatown, Jerry Goldsmith, a great score. But just permission to kind of draw on all these tools was amazing.
Yeah, and you got the themes were so rich and so detailed, and then so overlapping and layered. And we'd go in for reviews, and you'd be like, "Did you hear that one? Did you hear that? What's going on there?" And I'd be like, "Yeah." Sometimes.
I think we got to a point where every character had their own sound design element, whether that's for Flint, that might be like this kind of crumbling sound, a sand sound, or Megawatt later in the series has this kind of electric wind sound, but also every character has their own main theme, and then they have a short motif so that if they're just mentioned in passing, you can reference it for 1 second, or even just a chord progression. So we were very scholastic and nerdy about it.
Yeah, and then I'd be like, I like that, like the bees. I like the bees. What are the bees doing? You're like, what? Like, it sounds like they're like, zzz, zzz. Like, oh, that's a whatever. I'm like,
We'd send you like 10 Dropbox texts in a row. Like, is this the bee? No, is this the bee?
That's cool. But yeah, Jennifer and Hnedel, just to like the visual style of it as well. Like, were you kind of editing as if you were in the 1930s, or like what's some new stuff that I can kind of infuse into this noir?
Yeah, you know, when we first started editing, I definitely experimented with a bit of a slower pace and sort of, trying to nod to that. And then we sort of quickly discovered that it could be slower at some points, but that it needed to have a modern feel to it as well. So I think it was really fun to kind of walk that line and figure out where we could sort of hang a little bit, be a little bit slower and less editing. Like, for example, in Cat Hardy, when she's singing, there's less editing happening there. But like in the fight scenes or between Janet and Ben, like sort of the rat-tat-tat of their dialogue, that was really fun to sort of experiment on both sides with that.
Yeah. And Hnedel, was it using the VFX tools to create some of these shots that are still evocative of noir? Because people talk about like the Dutch angles and everything like that. I'm wondering, sort of using VFX to still get that old effect.
I mean, we had a very unique opportunity on this show because it's season 1 show. There's supers that are primarily grounded. And so from the very beginning, Oren was very specific about like, our supers need to feel grounded, but we also want to feel their powers, and they're not having a good time when they're going through their powers or in their heightened state. So developing the look for each character was took a little bit of doing. For Sandman, for example, we went through a few iterations. I pitched a couple ideas to Oren, and we talked about this. We talked about this last night. Oren, where he originally wrote that in his heightened state or when he's emotionally unstable, the sand will start swirling, right? And we did it. I pitched an idea of like a snake, like a sand viper burrowing in sand. And when we did a first pass of it, it looked great visually, but it was distracting. It started to pull away from his performance. And then in my original interview pitch, I pitched this idea of like playing with sound. I referenced this art installation by Cymatic, where there's a sand table and sand table over speakers, and you get these interesting patterns when different sound waves interact with the sand. And I thought it could be a good way to collaborate with the sound department and have like a good visual response for Sandman. And again, we did a version of it, and Oren was like, "It's cool, but I'm getting split focus. Like this is," so we kind of like pulled back and was like, okay, what would an organic sand evolution look like? And we started to pull inspiration from like mold spreading over bread, right? So like what would the skin transition to, and then you get that reddening, like eczema treatment, because again, they're not having fun. This is meant to be painful. So, you know, there's a red leading edge when his skin starts to like, gets irritated, and then it turns into sand. And you still see a little bit of the churning from the grains of sand moving, but it's dialed down to like 5%. And the only time you see like the grains of sand rushing over his hand is like in moments like when his hand reforms in Rockefeller, and then it happens again in 108. So that's, you know, specifically for Sandman. For Ben, again, we had this unique opportunity of designing, you know, what his web looked like. You know, we met with Michael Lasker and the VFX supervisor from Into the Spider-Verse and talked to some of the SPI team, Sony Picture, ImageWorks team, and they were super helpful in like, hey, you're on the Spider team, come into the archives, we'll show you all this stuff. And it was so cool, but then we brought all these references back to Oren, and Oren was like, yes, 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 but a lot of it was a bunch of no's, because again, he's a middle-aged guy who does not want to be the Spider. He's grumpy, he smokes, drinks a lot.
You're talking about Ben Reilly's character, not me.
Ben Riley, yeah, not Oren. So, you know, what would his web look like? Like, what would, you know, so we came up with a bunch of ideas. Our special effects team did some tests. We saw it. It was good to have something tactile to see and play with. And when we sent Oren some concepts, he was like, you know, remember there was a cool image from the special effects test. Let's bring some of that in. And we started adding more like grays and silvers in the chord of the web and playing more with the fraying. And we showed him 5 different variations before we settled on one. And then similarly we always knew we had to combine prosthetic and visual effects. So working with Vincent was super important. And I think like we knew the team was clicking when Vincent and I had very similar references for, you know, reference points for a lot of our characters, right? So like we started off and I showed Oren this victim of a lightning strike, and we get to Vincent's studio and there's the same image of a victim of a lightning strike, and we're like, oh, we're on the same team. Like we're seeing this the same way. So like for Megawatt Dirk, you know, we always knew we wanted the effects to be a little bit performative and aid in their performance. So like the pacing, the speed of the electricity coursing through his veins, the slowness and in the growth of the sand, all of it was just, it was a playground that we got to play in, and it was fun.
Yeah. I feel like that's a lot of great details that we can sort of look out for upon watching the rest of the season or even rewatching those episodes. I just wanted to check, I mean, with sound team, is there any sort of details that you may want to point out that when we're watching the show?
Well, one thing I would just say right now, you're the reason that Oren asked me, what does eczema sound like? Thank you for that. It was really fun
That
to try
is
to
a
figure
great
that out.
thought to think about entering the show, because I don't have the answer.
And it was great because it really makes you think. You're like, yeah, what would that sound like? So we had a lot of fun kind of playing around with sandpaper and like grit and salt, and there was a lot of playground to play in with Oren. It's a lot of fun. And Dan and everybody from the whole team really had some great ideas. One of the spider senses that you saw tonight, Dan Shear, one of our producers, had brought up wanting to hear Dream a Little Dream that we see later, where we kind of tie in how the spider sense is, you know, omnipresent, you know, not just multiversal, but in this universe, something's about to happen or something already happened. And so that was really kind of fun to take that challenge on and be like, oh, let's figure out how to put that in there, and talk to Jeremy Lamb, one of the music editors, and he put it together, and him and I kind of presented it, and then Nick did an amazing job putting that in there with the spider sense. So it was kind of like the whole team effort. in tackling every element of it. But the spider voice at the end of 102, when Ethan and I first met with Oren and the team, that was kind of our first challenge, was to come up with some ideas for the spider voice. So of course we came up with 10, because you don't want to just do 2 or 3. And I knew Oren and the team would get along really well when he picked our favorite. That was definitely a lot of fun to work on.
That's awesome. Front row, is there anything that you wanted to mention? Okay. I think one thing that's been great about these 2 panels is, like, if we put them together, it would just be too many people on stage. But Hnedel, like, as you were talking about, I love that although it was split, I feel like you all get a sense of how much of a collaborative project that this was. Is there any sort of last words on this experience of sort of everyone coming together in this way?
It's the best part about making stuff is you get to team up with all these people that are experts in their field. And this, we had 2 full panels. You guys, you could fill like 100 of these panels. There's so many people that go into making the show. It's insane. And everybody cares so much. It's the best part about making things is how passionate and how skilled the people that you get to work with are. So it's, I don't know, it's awe-inspiring and it's really fun.
Yeah. Collaborations I didn't think about. Questions I never thought of the answer, like, what does eczema sound like? Yeah. But thank you so much, everyone. And yes, I hope you all enjoyed Spider-Noir, coming soon to Prime Video.